What's going on, H2O Army? Joseph from H2O Plants. Today we're going to be doing an update on Lucky's tank as well as giving you our top 5 aquarium plants that work for goldfish. So stay tuned to check it out. Hit the subscribe button to enlist in the H2O Army. Also, hit the bell to join our elite notification squad. Alright guys, so it's been a while since you've seen Lucky last, and if you don't know who Lucky is or where he started, I will link up above. Check out the setup of this tank where my friend Kevin Kelly, he did this beautiful Aquos Cape and we added Lucky into this tank. But since that video, we've added a couple new things to this tank. So for one, Lucky was looking very lonely in this big 40-gallon tank by himself, as small as he was. So I wanted to go out and get him a friend. So we went and got a new goldfish to introduce to him. It is a Orenda. I do believe it's a female. I could be wrong. If you think you know what it is, leave it in the comments below. But we did get this Orenda goldfish, which is typically a much fatter, fancy goldfish, they're called, and it has a wen, or like this bubbly ripple thing, on its head. Typically, they grow quite big, the wen on them, but this one is quite small, which I actually wanted because when they get really big, they can impede the fish's vision. They could get infections, which have to constantly be maintained, and I didn't want to have to constantly maintain them, so a smaller one is ideal. Now, I haven't come up with a name for her yet, but if you come up with a cool name, leave it in the comments below and let me know what you think it should be, and if it is a she. On top of her, I also got 5 zebra Longfin Danios. They're very cool looking fish. They have these nice flowy fins and beautiful pattern, and they're just overall give it some life. Now I know what you're thinking, and a lot of goldfish enthusiasts may be saying, oh, you can't mix them because the water temperatures are too off. Well, this tank is kept at about 70 to 72 degrees, so it is right there in the middle. Maybe slightly too hot for the goldfish and too cold for the Danios, but overall they're doing just fine. We did lose one Danio, however, and that I just attribute to coming in as a new fish. It did last like a month or two, and then just he passed away, unfortunately. But we still have the other 4, which are doing fantastic. Now, a lot of people said, oh, well, the Danios will be nipping at the fins of the goldfish because they're fin nippers. They have actually never been nipped. I always check the fins of both Lucky and the other goldfish, and I never see any nipping, so I know that they are fine. Typically, what I think it is when the Danios are in a much smaller tank and don't have a lot of space, that they will nip at each other's fins. But because they have a nice broad open space, they've really calmed down since I first got them, and they haven't really done much fin nipping. Actually, their fins are healing from all the nipping that had occurred before I got them. In addition to the Danios and the goldfish, I also got a Bristol nose Pleco, and this is another one that's going to drive some goldfish owners crazy. You can't put a Pleco in with goldfish, they'll always tell you, because the goldfish or the Pleco will eventually suck on the goldfish's slime coat. Well, I think this may be true in some cases with other Plecos, but the Bristol nose Pleco is very timid. It doesn't actually come out that much. It's very well hidden. It's mainly sucking on the glass and on the rocks and on the wood, which helps maintain the overall appearance of the aquarium. It maintains any sort of algae growth on both the glass and the wood and the rocks, so it does my job for me. Also, I've never once seen it on the goldfish, either one of them. I've never noticed a mark on the goldfish in the last 3 months, I think, that we've had them. No marks whatsoever, been doing just fine. I think it has to do with how much you feed them, if you kept them well fed. With that said, I only feed this tank every other or every 2 days. They don't need to eat a whole lot every day, so I just give them a big feeding every couple days, and they all do quite well. While on the topic of maintenance of this tank, it is virtually zero maintenance. I do very little to this tank other than a water change when our ammonia or nitrate levels get too high. Typically, that's once every 3 to 4 weeks, so virtually it doesn't need a water change until that time. And the only reason why I think that is because we're constantly fluctuating some floating plants that we have in here, which we'll touch on in a second, and I think that that's pulling out a lot of nitrates. Sometimes we pull out too many floating plants, the nitrate levels go back up. So we only do a water change once every couple of weeks on this tank. It's virtually a zero maintenance tank because of the Pleco and also the Malaysian Trumpet snails that we added in here. The Malaysian Trumpet snails help keep the substrate really crystal clean, essentially, because they're constantly turning it over. Malaysian Trumpet snails, they like to dig down into the substrate, and when they dig down into the substrate, they move it around, they break up any sort of algae or detritus that may be building up on the substrate, and bringing it down to the sand where the roots of the plants can actually use them. Even though we have a big open area, here, then there's no plants using them. They're still bringing that detritus, mixing it up, and that way it doesn't build up and cause a nasty brownish look, which you don't see when you look at this aquarium's substrate. It looks a little bit dark because there's not a whole lot of light getting through because of all the floating plants we have, but it is white compared to what it would look without. Also, the goldfish are constantly picking at the substrate looking for food, so they are also mixing up the substrate as well. A lot of people look at the Malaysian Trumpet snails as pests, mainly because they produce so many offspring so quickly, but overall I see very few of them in the tank at any given time unless the lights are out. Typically when the lights are out, you'll see them all pretty much come out because that's when they're actively looking for stuff. But during the day when the light is on, they're typically buried in the substrate. As of right now, I can maybe only see about 10, and there's over 60 in here. We started off with just 10 of them, and within a couple months we do have a lot. I am hoping to be able to sell them in the future, so that is something that I'm looking forward to. But I'm waiting for them to get to any sort of reasonable size. In addition to the Malaysian Trumpet snails, we also added in some Narite snails, and those were actually just out of sheer necessity. I needed a tank for them. I threw them in here, and they've been doing quite well. I haven't seemed to need to take them out, really. They're doing a fantastic job along with the Pleco, keeping everything clean. I don't have to clean the glass. I don't have to gravel back the substrate. We don't have to clean any of the wood or the rocks or the plants. It is all self-sustaining. Like I said, all we have to do is a water change whenever our levels of ammonia and nitrate get out of whack. But because we have plants, and that brings us into our top 5 plants, we don't have to do that many water changes. Now, I don't suggest you neglect your water changes for anybody out there. Do your water changes. They're highly important to your tank. But I am using this tank as a test experiment to learn, as well as teach others what you can do with plants effectively. So with that said, let's get into our top 5 aquarium plants for goldfish. Number 1 would be none other than the Anubis Nana Petite that I have in here, or any sort of Anubis. Anubis is a really hardy beginner plant. I suggest it for pretty much anybody just starting out, but it is a foolproof plant for any sort of aquarium. In particular, these goldfish aren't so big yet that they can be in here with Anubis Nana Petite. As they grow bigger, I may need to upgrade it to a bigger leafed Anubis, such as Barney or Coffeefolia, but there's so many other varieties out there that are bigger leafed for bigger fish that any one of them will really do. Anubis can either be tied to rocks or driftwood, planted in a planter, or planted in the substrate. Just make sure the rhizome is not buried under the substrate, and the rhizome is the horizontal piece that all the leaves come out of. So our second top aquarium plant for goldfish would be Dwarf Aquarium Lily. Now, Dwarf Aquarium Lily is actually a red sort of plant. It sends up lily pads that will grow anywhere in the water column essentially, but once it reaches the surface, all it wants to do is shoot up its leaves to the surface. They're a beautiful pink and red color, and they float there. The goldfish can't really bother them because they're too big, they can't fit them in their mouth, and overall, a really good plant for goldfish, especially if you want to add in some sort of color. So our third plant would be the banana plant, also inside of this tank. Well, the banana plant is not my favorite plant to use in an Aquos Cape. It is particularly good for goldfish, as it is very similar to the Dwarf Aquarium Lily, except that it is green versus the red leaves, so it provides a nice color contrast between the greens and the reds. Pretty much the same thing, you just set it on the substrate as the Dwarf Aquarium Lily, and it just kind of grows and does its own thing. So our number 4 aquarium plant for goldfish would be floating plants. Now, duckweed, they will eat, no doubt about it. So duckweed is not a good floating plant for goldfish. It's actually a really tasty snack for them if you want to feed them some good and healthy stuff. It's very high in protein and high in other nutrients, so it's really good for goldfish's digestive system and all that. But there are other floating plants like Salvinia minima, dwarf water lettuce, and frogbit, all of which work great in this tank, which I have them in here. We actually added them in here because I wanted them to pick the duckweed out of them, which they did. They pretty much annihilated all the duckweed in all these floating plants, and that allows me to try and cut down the amount of duckweed that's shipped out with them. So that brings us to number 5 of our goldfish plants, and that would be Java fern. Very similar to Anubis, but different leaf structure, bigger, taller leaves, good for backgrounds. Overall, Java fern are a really hardy species, very similar to Anubis, and will not be eaten by goldfish, so they're my number 5 recommendation. But that brings me to this point in the video, guys. Let me know down in the comments below, what's your favorite plant to put with the goldfish if you've ever kept one, or what other suggestions would you have for somebody keeping goldfish that wants planted tanks? This way, if they're watching this video for the first time, maybe they'll see some other suggestions, or some things that may not have worked for some of you, and that way they can learn what might be good for them. As always, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and share with your friends if they're getting into goldfish or maybe have goldfish and want to do plants. This is a really good way to learn some things about them. Anyway, guys, I will see you next time.
Hey! Let's go! Back! Yo, once again I'm back around. Real shit back in style. Haters reconcile. I'm so black and proud. First class tickets now. Feet all in the eye.